first relic, the Geofon Sea rolled in heavy, slate-gray swells beneath the great causeway linking the mainland of Nitwertha to the somber bastion of Nitward. The fortress, first raised under the orders of Wulfgar, acting upon the counsel of Mentor Psychana Mentis, to serve as an Iron Hands fortress monastery upon this inhospitable world, now stood as the chapter house of the Void Revenants. In keeping with Werthan sensibilities, part pride, part superstition, nothing of the original structure was torn down. The Werthans had always preferred to build upward rather than replace the work of a previous generation. Thus the gatehouse and forward bastion still bore the angular, unyielding architecture of Medusan stonesmiths. The black-veined masonry, cut and set by artisans long gone to dust, endured in silent defiance of the centuries. Where the Void Revenants had added to the fortress, they had done so with grim austerity. Instead of the deep blue quarried stone imported in the chapter's earliest days, they had continued upward in obsidian brought from the volcanic world of Furburg, its jagged edges tamed only by plasteel plating. The dull, iron gray of the fortress' newer walls suited the chapter's temperament. They did not gleam, but drank in the light. Banners, long, tattered streamers bearing the sigils of the chapter's companies, snapped and coiled in the rain-heavy wind. Ravens, black and innumerable, gathered around the bolter turrets and autocannon embrasures, their croaks half lost beneath the hiss of the surf. At the head of the returning column rumbled the chapter master's own Land Raider Crusader. The 12 heavy bolter sponsons, 6 to each flank, were swaddled in oiled sailcloth, protecting the sacred machine spirits from the omnipresent salt carried by the ocean spray. In the open turret hatch, Hearthguard Captain Sirherd sat braced against the movement, one gauntleted hand resting upon the secondary multi-melta. That, too, was bound in weatherproofed hide, its arcane workings kept safe from the coming squall. He wore no helm, letting the rain and spray lash against his scarred face, and grinned as the fortress loomed nearer. It had been too long since duty had carried him home. The Crusader thundered past the midpoint of the bridge, where 2 new pillboxes squatted like watchful sentinels, their plasteel shells bristling with pintle-mounted autocannons. Beyond them rose the forward gatehouse, rebuilt after the Daemon incursion. That siege had driven home hard lessons. The Neverborn had reached these very gates before Scop Wulfgar and the Deacon had driven them screaming into the sea. Now, the gates were reinforced with layered adamantine shutters, and the causeway was configured to be cut in 3 places with demolition charges if ever breached. The vehicle slowed as the gate lift began its ponderous rise, the vox hymn of its servitor crew echoing off the stone. Sirherd gave a short, deliberate salute to the chapter serf guards as they stood to attention, then slammed his fist twice on the hull. The Crusader growled forward once more. Crossing into the second span of the causeway, they passed the main portcullis under the watchful eyes of servitor-controlled Lascanon turrets mounted high in the battlements. At last, the Land Raider ground to a halt, treads churning against the rain-slicked cobbles of the outer courtyard. Water sluiced from the glacis in sheets, spattering against the flagstones. Here, the courtyard yawned open to the storm-dark sky, ringed by an outer wall whose interior was hollowed into vast cavernous alcoves, each one shaped to fit the sacred scale of the chapter's armored vehicles. 3 immense vaults housed the Void Revenants' only Land Raiders. The rest were sized for turreted Predator tanks, whirlwinds, and Rhino transports. Many bays stood empty, their occupants deployed across the fleet or stationed at bastions scattered around the island. In truth, the chapter's armored arsenal was under the purview of Captain Oswald, master of the 8th Company and keeper of the chapter's heavy armor, in Grudigan's Tower, a fortress crowning the great forge on the far side of the island, where the roar of industry drowned even the sea's eternal thunder. The front assault ramp of the Land Raider Crusader slammed down, water splashing in a great sheet that ran in rivulets to the base of the bastion steps. Wulfgar stood waiting at their head, Crozius resting across his crossed arms. Beside him, Runesmith Hathred and Captain Sinwolf stood at rigid attention. Off to one side of the great stairs, Heorwulf leaned with casual posture, but his helm's lenses tracked every approach to the fortress monastery and courtyard, linked to the eyes of his scouts. So far, nothing had stirred his concern, though he was not one to lower his guard. From the red-lit interior of the Crusader, Beornwulf stepped down the ramp, Hearthguard moving close about him. Wulfgar's eyes counted them, only 4. The absence of the 5th was like an old wound reopening. He let out a slow breath and gave a wordless nod to the 2 captains flanking him. They looked terrible. The cataphractii plate was scorched, buckled, and cracked. Splinter-round impacts pitted the ceramite. Boarding shields were ragged and gouged as if struck by a giant's claws. Steam hissed from failing servos, rain running over armor caked with sealant foam and the crude patches of battlefield repair. Mechanicus adepts and chapter priests rushed forward, servo skulls buzzing in tight spirals, auspex arrays scanning for structural failures as emergency repairs began even as the warriors advanced. Aethelnoth stumbled, his leg servos giving out entirely, hydraulic fluid spurting from ruptured seals. A robed adept caught at him, but the Astartes' weight nearly pulled the man down until Cinnabil stepped in, steadying his brother with an armored grip. "Come on, you old fool," Cinnabil muttered, taking the now empty assault cannon from him. "If runesmith Haethred saw you using this as a crutch, he'd blow a gasket." Beornwulf halted to let them pass, then turned to Wulfgar. "Apologies, Lord," said Wulfgar. "The fleet was unable to come to your aid." Beornwulf removed his helm, holding it by the boar's tusk crest, and lifted his gaze to the darkening sky. Rain ran in silver streams over his scarred features. He smiled. "No matter, Wulfgar. We return to the hearth in any case." Wulfgar inclined his skull-faced helm in reply. Sinwulf stepped forward, and the 2 clasped gauntlets. "Well met," Sinwulf said. Haethred descended the steps, sweeping his scanning array over the chapter master's battered cataphractia. "Your plate is reduced to 23% efficiency," the runesmith reported flatly. "Integrity negligible. I do not believe it can be restored. I will inform Magos Tiberius to have a suitable replacement cast at the Great Forge." Beornwulf waved away a buzzing servitor skull bearing an umbraculum against the rain. "I thought Calculus Logifexion ran the forge now." Sinwulf shook his head, catching the skull and redirecting it towards a knot of adepts, unloading something long and wrapped in silk from the Crusader's rear bay. "No, Tiberius has resumed direct control. Brother Fexion has been seconded to oversee the Eclipse of Destiny's refit." Beornwulf's eyes narrowed slightly. "Anything else change while I've been gone?" "We moved the round table from the Homborg to Nightweird Hall," Haethred said, without looking up from his scans. "A replica, of course, but we brought some of the original masonry here." He paused, examining Beornwulf's broken augmetic hand with undisguised disapproval. Beornwulf pulled his hand back. "Isn't that a matter for the master?" The Scop lifted his free hand in a placating gesture, his Crozius held low in the other, its haft augmetic like much of the man himself. Flotward Edric gave the order. "I thought you considered it unnecessary for the chapter master to be burdened with such things. That is why he is second, your master of the fleet." Beornwulf gave a brief nod. He would have to grow accustomed to delegating, he realized. His attention shifted as 2 shattered suits of armor were carried past, scorched ceramite and twisted plating borne by serfs under the watch of solemn battle brothers. "Chief Gastward Elfric and Hearthguard Wilmund," Beornwulf said quietly, "our first losses." Wulfgar bowed his head, signaling his personal staff forward to take the remains. "Their armor will be interred in the chapter mausoleum, Lord." His voice held the faintest tension. "They are both a great loss." Beornwulf's gaze flickered to him. "I know Elfric was one of your old Iron Hands brethren. As for Wilmund, he was from the 2nd Muster, once of Hlaford Friodhoric's men before joining us. I will pay homage to his kin." "Elfric was a troubled soul," Wulfgar said, "but he fell with his wounds to the fore. Born of Medusa, but he died as a Wigathan. As for Wilmund, I can carry the words to his people, if you wish it." Sinwulf lifted the bier's silk covering, revealing little more than burnt fragments of plate within. "I will take the duty, Lord," he said quietly. "He was of my folk." Beornwulf shook his head. "No, I will perform it. In years to come I may not be able to honor all the fallen in person, but for now the task is mine." Wulfgar's gaze swept the misted courtyard again. "And we will have to discuss the reports of Wilmund's return." "Later," Beornwulf said, his tone final. That matter is for the council. Wulfgar bowed in agreement. The remains were borne into the bastion. Behind them came the procession of adepts carrying the long, silk-wrapped bundle. Wulfgar drew in a slow breath. The relic? Yes. Beornwulf set his real hand upon the scope's pauldron. Come, let me introduce you to it. Together, Chaptermaster and Scop ascended the rain-slicked steps, vanishing into the shadowed halls of Neatwyrd. Sinwulf remained in the rain-slick courtyard, overseeing the unloading. He gave a short nod to Searherd and Bergwine, the latter still carrying what remained of his boarding shield, now barely a quarter of its original size, and looking as though a dozen wargs had gnawed it to splinters. So, Sinwulf said, the rumors about Wilmund, any truth to them? Bergwine handed the ruined shield to Haethrid, who gave a disapproving tut and wandered off with it, muttering to himself about structural integrity. Once the runesmith was gone, Bergwine turned back to the first captain. Yes, he said flatly, the rumors are true. Wilmund came back to fight by our side, a revenant. Sinwulf waited for the punchline, eyes flicking to Searherd, but the other warrior's expression carried no hint of jest. I saw him too, Searherd said. He was a revenant, like the Neverborn, but a spirit Astartes. Sinwulf stared, rain streaking down the ridges of his helm. And you fought Draugr as well, on the Eotensip? Both men nodded. Draugr brought back by Wulfegan himself, Searherd confirmed. Sinwulf exhaled slowly. I know the chapter's whole aesthetic is ghosts and the living dead, but I didn't think it was supposed to be literal. Bergwine grunted, the sound echoing behind his helm. We challenge the void pushes back. He started up the steps. And it has a sense for the dramatic, Searherd added as he followed. Sinwulf watched them go, then turned to Hurrowulf. You hear that? Actual revenants. There was no reply. The spot where the 10th captain had been lounging a moment earlier was empty. Only a patch of dry stone, already freckled by fresh raindrops, marked his passing. Sinwulf gave a shrug. He was used to talking to himself anyway. In the high tower, Beornwulf entered the fortress monastery's grand reliquary. The vaulted chamber was vast and silent. The only sound was the whisper of rain hammering against distant stone, the sharp echo of bootsteps on flagstones, and the faint, indistinct thunder of sea and aircraft from far below. Wulfgar stood at the forefront, arms crossed, as the silken-wrapped relic was carried in by adepts. From the upper galleries, new footsteps approached, one measured, punctuated by the tap of a staff of office. The other heavy, each stride marked by the faint squeak of ill-fitted boots. Wulfgar turned his helm slightly as Deacon Absalon entered through the rear arch, aquila-topped staff in hand. Beside him walked Inquisitor Katerina Malinovska, her yellow coat scuffed from battle, boots dripping rainwater from the storm outside. Both were caught in the wavering glow of braziers and the pale illumination of Leotsumer falling through high rose windows. Scop Wulfgar wished for a fleeting moment that he had brought the ceremonial robes of his office, but he knew the chapter master had little taste for such trappings, especially before so small a gathering. Godric and Osric were already waiting. Godric's dreadnought frame filled a quarter of the chamber, servos groaning with every subtle shift. Both runsmiths bowed to the deacon as the adepts brought the relic forward. The sodden silk was drawn back. Beneath, the black, liquid-like surface of Death's God shimmered unnaturally, runes etched along its length, glowing as if alive. The blade seemed to drink the light around it. Wulfgar stepped forward, taking it reverently and setting it on a stand Osric had hastily forged for the occasion. With solemnity he raised it and laid it upon the round table. Atramentum nex, Wulfgar said softly, voice near trembling as he read the Medusan script revealed along its edge. Osric swept an auspex over the weapon. The blade's liquid sheen seemed almost to flow beneath the scan. The Blade of Shadow, Osric breathed. Perhaps forged by the Gorgon's own hand, it has been 5 millennia since Umbra Mortis was last seen. Beornwulf fixed him with a searching look. So you know of it? Wulfgar placed his hands lightly upon the blade. The surface rippled like water, runes blooming to life across the length. It is recorded in the chapter's reliquary of the lost, he said. Osric examined the readings with care. Some of the alloys are pre-heresy, none later. It appears authentic, a true relic, not a forgery. Godric's vox-augmented voice rumbled like thunder through the chamber. Umbra Mortis was forged during the Great Crusade, or so the record suggests. Perhaps some components predate even that. Who can say? The Iron Fathers often reforged the works of earlier ages into new forms. Beornwulf frowned, his scarred face creased with doubt. I have seen this blade in battle. I have wielded it. It draws in psychic energy, stores it, casts it back as waves of warp fire. He looked around the chamber. Forgive me, but that does not sound like the work of the Iron Hands, not the kind of weapon our Gene-sire would forge. There was silence until Osric spoke with a grim sort of cheer. You are correct, Lord. Yet consider, if a legion scorns the warp and venerates the machine, what better answer to a psyker than a blade that nullifies their advantage, a weapon to face the witch on his own terms, forged through metallurgy and artifice rather than witchery. Pragmatism, an unorthodox solution to an unorthodox threat. Beornwulf put a hand to his chin. Pragmatism seems to be a theme with our new chapter. Yes, Wulfgar smiled faintly. It seems to be the order of the day in the Reach. The deacon gave a low chuckle. Frontiersman spirit, he observed, lowering the aquila-topped staff so the twin eagle heads hovered above the blade. For a moment, the ink-black surface mirrored the staff's shape before returning to its restless, water-like rippling. May I ask how it works? Is it some kind of hollow field? Osric shook his head. No, it is actual liquid, not illusion. It is called metallum vivens, living metal to you and me. Never heard of it, said Katerina Malinovska, her voice edged with suspicion. It sounds dangerous. Are you certain it isn't demonic? It does look like a demon blade. Godric gave a snorting laugh through his vox grill. You should visit Medusa sometime. Our Gorgon slew a great sandworm on its dune seas. From that beast came the metallum vivens that fused with his flesh, forming the silver hands of Ferrus Manus. It is the very origin of our sire's name. I did not know that, Katerina admitted, intrigued. Yes, indeed, lady, Osric continued. The great worms of Medusa are described as colossal serpentine Xenos beasts, not mere animals, but titanic predators dwelling in the wastelands, volcanic ravines, and ice fields. Godric's voice rumbled like stone grinding. Their biology allows them to digest the iron of the dunes. The metal becomes metallum vivens and flows in their ichor. That is the same substance from which this blade was made. Sadly, once the beast dies, the metal becomes inert. Were it otherwise, the Iron Hands would have harvested it long ago. Small amounts can still be found today, but only with great effort, used mainly for ceremonial wards or locks of high security. Wulfgar spoke next. Among the Iron Hands, the worm is the totem beast of our Primarch. Some cults, and even our successor chapters, still carve worm forms into armor or heraldry, though always as a mark of Ferris's legend, never as worship. Beornwulf was learning far more today than he had expected. Then I see the link the Iron Hands first saw on Neat Wertha. The worm has as much to do with our own sagas as it does with yours. Yours from sand, ours from sea. But your worms have wings, while ours are cold drakes, Osric observed. It's not your fault yours never learned to fly, brother, Beornwulf replied. Both men laughed. To the Mechanicum, Godric rumbled. The worm was catalogued as a Xenos-class organism with anomalous metallurgical properties. There may even be a common origin. Remember, the Langfarawida and her sister ships passed by Medusa more than 15,000 years ago. Our myths may share a root. The deacon placed his palm upon the blade. The liquid surface shivered faintly at his touch. Osric lowered his own hand, and the black metal rolled like a cresting wave around his fingers. Interesting, he said. The metal may be genicoded to the Iron Hands, Godric suggested. Or perhaps it senses post-human physiology, Beornwulf mused, laying his own hand on the weapon. The metal surged briefly up his fingers, then sank back down into the blade's form. Or maybe it just reacts to who is dressed best, Godric quipped. Even Osric gave a dry chuckle at that. Katerina broke the moment. How did it end up on that junk pile of a space hulk in the hands of Drakari raiders? Godric shook his massive frame. The chapter records are silent. Much was lost in the heresy. Beornwulf nodded. Then the ballad of Umbra Mortis continues now with the Void Revenants, as Daithsked. I will enter it in the chapter records as the first relic of our chapter, Lord, said Wulfgar solemnly. At that moment, a chapter serf entered the reliquary, bowing low before the master and the scop. Lords, the manifold Dawn shuttle has landed. Preacher Lucia Gratner and Admiral Dragovich are being escorted to the Round Table chamber. Bjornwolf stood for a moment lost in thought, then looked to the others. Osric, Godric, you have much work to do with the Eclipse of Destiny. Once you finish here, I leave it to you to organize. Osric grinned. Thank you, Lord, and good luck with Lady Lucia. Personally, I would rather fight a giant sandworm with one hand chained to an anvil. Bornwolf made a face at that. Then he and Wolfgar stepped from the reliquary, dismissing the serf with a nod. Come, Deacon, we have tithes to pay and groveling to do. They did save my life, after all, and I do hate being in the debt of an oath. The deacon smiled back, nodding to the two runesmiths and granting both a brief blessing before following the others out. Katerina lingered, watching them go. She brushed down her yellow tunic and rain-stained coat. Her voice was half apology, half practical. Brother Runesmith, I don't suppose you have a few pieces of armor lying around? I appear to have misplaced my old uniform. Osric's lenses clicked as he looked her up and down. Well, lady, we have chapter serf armor that may fit your stature, but I believe I have something more suited to your countenance. He gestured towards the back of the reliquary. A suit I was working on for the late queen. It was never completed in silver, but the lacquer still holds. Katerina stepped into the adjoining chamber. There stood the armor, black plate lacquered to a glassy sheen, serpentine patterns of neat Wertha etched across its surface. The pauldrons bore the worm of the royal house, high and crested. She laid a hand upon the cuirass. It was smooth as polished obsidian, cold to the touch. Behind her, Osric opened a long-forgotten casket, dust falling away as he lifted the lid. He reached inside and withdrew 2 items. The first he offered to her. I forged this for your father. He never returned to claim it. She took the small thing in her hand, a brooch of gold and crimson, shaped as the sigil of the Inquisition. Thank you, she said softly. She had only recently become an agent of the Ordos. Her mission to Elfscathia had been her first task, completed only with the unlikely aid of the Void Revenants. She was still unsteady in her new station, still uncertain of her place among them. Holding the brooch and seeing the armor, she felt as if she were standing in the path of fate, each moment guiding her here. She shook herself, adjusted her torn tunic, and said more briskly, It will do, Runesmith. Osric bowed slightly and raised the second object. Then, lady, there is also this. Her breath caught. It was a pistol, old, archaic, shaped like a flintlock relic, but wrought with brass vents and a gold-inlaid pommel housing a power cell. Its form suggested plasma, or perhaps even volkite. It was heavier than she expected and uncannily familiar. It was your father's, Osric explained. Archmagos Pyrovox found it amid the wreck of the Secutor reliquary. How it survived, the Emperor only knows. Pyrovox repaired it, and I added a few features. He looked almost apologetic. I meant to return it to the next Inquisitor sent to the Reach. It seems it falls to you. Katerina examined the weapon. The barrel was split into 3 brass prongs, each etched with the heads of snarling wargs, a gravfield stabilizer in miniature. Thank you, she said again more firmly. From outside the chamber came a booming whisper. Godric's vast frame stooped at the doorway, his dreadnought bulk unable to enter. I added the wargs, he said, voice like grinding stone. Katerina looked at him, half obscured in shadow beyond the threshold. You fought beside my father, did you not, Brother Godric? The great machine rumbled. I took mortal wounds in that battle. You could say, your father made me the runesmith I am today. A chuckle reverberated through his vox. She placed the weapon in her holster beside her issued bolt pistol, then inclined her head. Thank you. Her voice carried genuine respect. She glanced around at the reliquary with new eyes. This truly is a reliquary, isn't it? Osric set a gauntlet lightly on her shoulder. Lady, once your armor is fitted, I will show you my workshop on Nithhelm. That is where the true wonders lie. Outside, the thunder rolled again. Rain hammered against the stone walls, and the voice of the sea rose to join it, as if the fortress itself were breathing with the storm.